Tonight, we'll take you somewhere uncomfortable and quiet. First, you'll live a day as a medieval peasant, cold, hungry, barefoot, and very itchy. Then, we'll drift into the forgotten story of a royal woman who nearly ruled England, but lost everything to pride and betrayal. And finally, we'll descend into stone silence, where a nameless woman chose to be walled into a church forever, becoming a legend of faith and disappearance. It's boring, it's strange, and it might just lull you to sleep. Get cozy, breathe slow, and let's begin our quiet journey through the soft discomforts of forgotten history. You wake up choking. Smoke curls into your throat like a ribbon of old ash and goat hair. The fire didn't go out overnight. Someone threw wet straw on it again, and now it smolders instead of burns. Your eyes sting. Your tongue tastes like soot and sour milk. You cough, blink, and remember, you're not dead. Just still here. The mattress beneath you is straw. Not fresh straw. Not clean straw. This is the kind of straw that has absorbed 5 seasons of sweat, rainwater, fleas, and other things you've stopped thinking about. It pokes you in the ribs, in the neck, in places straw should never reach. You try to roll over. Something shifts under the blanket. You freeze. It shifts again. It's the chicken. You sleep with the chickens now. There's no separate coop. They live in the corner of the hut and wander where they please. One has nestled against your leg like it owns the place. You reach down, give it a gentle nudge. It pecks your hand and waddles off. Offended, there's no pillow. Just a rolled-up tunic that hasn't been washed since harvest. You unwrap it and gag. It smells like cheese and old bread. You press it to your face anyway. It's cold, but at least it's dry. Your blanket is a patchwork of matted wool, burlap, and mystery stains. You can't remember who stitched it or when. It smells like wet dog and mold. When you lift it off, it releases a cloud of dust and something that might be lice. You scratch your head out of habit. Your scalp has been itching for weeks. You sit up. The hut creaks around you. Wattle and daub walls smeared with smoke. A roof patched with moss. The air smells like ashes, old stew, damp wood, and pig droppings. Your mouth is dry. Your back hurts. You slept in your clothes, same as yesterday, and the day before that they're stiff with sweat, bent at the knees, and spotted with last week's porridge. You tug at the collar, trying to shake off the feeling that something crawled in during the night. You don't check. You don't want to know. Beside you, your younger brother is still asleep. He twitches in his dreams, muttering about soup. In the far corner, your mother stirs in her blanket, coughing softly into her sleeve. Your uncle hasn't moved. For a moment, you wonder if he's still breathing. Then he snores. Loudly, a rooster screams outside. You sigh? Morning. You reach for the wooden basin near the wall. The water in it is cloudy. You don't know if it's from the well, the river, or just collected rainwater. It doesn't matter. You splash your face, shivering as the cold hits your skin. It drips down your shirt, but you're used to that now. You grab a scrap of cloth and wipe your face. It's scratchy. You're not sure if it's a rag, a sock, or part of an old tunic. You don't care. It works. Your stomach growls. You ignore it. There might be bread left from yesterday. Or not. You'll find out soon enough. But for now, you stand. Slowly. Cautiously. 1 foot at a time. The floor is dirt. Always has been. Always will be. And so the day begins. The first real struggle of the day is getting your legs to cooperate. Your knees creak as you stand. Slowly. Carefully. Like the bones inside you are made of wet firewood. You wobble. Catch yourself on the wall and stretch your arms overhead until your shoulders pop in protest. Outside, the wind groans through the gaps in the wood like an old man whispering bad news. The air is damp, and the hut is colder than it was last night. You can see your breath in tiny puffs. You pull your shirt tighter. It doesn't help. It's still damp from yesterday's sweat. Or maybe the river water from last week. Or maybe the roof leak. You don't keep track anymore. You shuffle over to the basin again. You're hoping the water looks better this time. It doesn't. If anything, it looks worse, grayer, thicker, with something floating in it. You lean closer. It's a dead bug. Or part of a dead bug. You flick it out, scoop a handful of water, and splash your face anyway. The shock hits you hard. The water is ice cold and smells faintly like soil and iron. You breathe through your nose and splash again. It stings, but you've convinced yourself it counts as bathing. You reach for the cloth again, the scratchy one, and this time, it's not where you left it. You look around, squinting in the dim light. Your younger brother is using it to wipe his nose. He doesn't look up. You let it go. What's the point? You bend to wrap your feet. You don't have shoes. No one your age does. Children sometimes get a pair if they're lucky. Adults make do. You take the wool strips from under your bed, two mismatched pieces, stiff with age and damp with morning air, and begin winding them around your feet. They itch instantly. You try not to think about the fleas or the worms or the fact that once, last summer, you pulled something squirming from between your toes. Today is just another day. You open the hut door. It doesn't really open. It jerks forward, drags across the dirt, and finally gives way with a wheeze. Cold wind punches you in the face. You blink, mud everywhere. The entire world outside has turned to slush. Brown, thick, freezing slop. You take a careful step, instantly sinking past your ankles. You pull your foot out with a wet squelch and keep moving. Your neighbor is already outside, trying to coax a goat through the gate. The goat is not interested. The man curses under his breath and slips, landing flat in the mud. The goat trots off without him. You don't laugh. You're too tired to laugh. Your job today is hauling buckets from the stream. You think it might also be stacking logs or helping your uncle dig a trench to keep the pigs from wandering into the churchyard again. Before that, though, breakfast, you trudge back inside, step around your sleeping uncle, and rummage in the storage basket. There's bread. Barely. A sliver of old rye crust, hard enough to chip a tooth. You suck on it rather than chew. It tastes like wood and sour air. You find a lump of onion. You sniff it. Still edible. You gnaw it in tiny bites and blink back tears. Not emotional ones, just the onion doing its job. Your cousin passes you a bowl. It's wooden, cracked, and stained with years of porridge. He hands you a spoon carved from bone. You gnaw it. It's a kindness. The bowl contains the last of yesterday's gruel, lukewarm, lumpy, and spotted with floating bits you choose not to investigate. You eat in silence. Everyone does. The hut is filled with the sounds of chewing, sniffing, and occasional throat clearing. Your mother mutters something about St. Cuthbert and the weather. You nod even though you don't know what she means. It's probably a prayer. Someone farts. No one reacts. You step outside again, bowl in hand. You rinse it in the barrel beside the door. The water in the barrel is dark, still, and slick with something green. You dip the bowl quickly, then shake it dry. The village is waking now. A few huts crack open. A child screams somewhere. A dog barks, then whines, then disappears into a bush. Smoke starts to rise from a half-dozen chimneys. You wonder what they're burning. You hope it's not dung again. Last time, the smell lingered for a week. You wipe your hands on your tunic. They're still cold. You stare at your feet, wrapped in wool, already soaked in mud. The wind picks up, and your day has just begun. The Lord doesn't ask if you're ready. He never has. The work begins when the sun rises, or at least when the mud starts steaming. You trudge across the field, your feet already numb inside the soggy wool wrappings. Every step makes a sickening squish. The mud is thick today, clinging like wet bread dough. It tries to swallow your ankles. You don't fight it. You just keep moving. The tools wait in the shed. Shed is generous. It's really a leaning wooden box filled with rust, splinters, and regret. You grab a hoe. The handle is smooth, from years of use, and also from sweat, blood, and maybe someone's spit. You don't ask questions. The field stretches before you like a wet graveyard. Rows of half-dead turnips and knotted cabbage roots poke up like broken teeth. Crows watch from the fence posts, waiting for you to leave so they can steal again. You swing the hoe once, twice, 3 times. It thuds into the dirt, barely cutting through. The soil is too wet, too cold, too stubborn. Like everything else in your life, you work in silence. Everyone does. There are others in the field, dozens of them, moving slowly, bent at the waist like broken reeds. You know their names. You know who lost a child last winter. You know who might be stealing from the grain storage. You know who hasn't spoken. Since the bishop's tax collector came through last month, you all dig the same. After a while, your fingers stop hurting. That's not good. It means the feeling's going. You grip the handle harder and keep working. Your breath clouds in the air. Your nose drips. You wipe it on your sleeve, then realize your sleeve is coated in dirt. You taste soil for the rest of the morning. The Lord rides past on horseback. His cloak is blue, bright blue. You've never touched cloth that color before. It looks soft, warm, expensive. The horse is even cleaner than you are. Its hooves barely touch the mud. The Lord doesn't wave. He doesn't look at you. He might not even know your name, but he knows your taxes. Your back starts to ache before the sun is fully over the trees. You try to straighten. You can't. Your spine makes a sound like old wood snapping. You keep digging. The man beside you suddenly drops his hoe. You pause. He sways on his feet, then crumples to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. He doesn't move. Someone calls his name. No answer. Someone else leans down, puts a hand to his chest, then shakes their head. Dead. One cries. No one screams. One man curses under his breath, mostly because now he'll have to do double work. They drag the body to the edge of the field and leave it there. You'll dig a hole later. Maybe after supper. Maybe tomorrow. You keep working. By midday, your shoulders burn. Your hands are raw. You switch to gathering wood near the edge of the forest. It's slightly better. You're allowed to pick fallen branches, but you're not allowed to cut anything. Everything belongs to the Lord. Even the trees, you find. A few decent logs and tie them together with a bit of rope. Your rope is actually old pig intestine, but it holds. The forest is quiet, and for a moment you enjoy it. You can almost hear birds. You let yourself breathe. Then you step in something. It's not mud. It's softer, warmer, animal dung. Fresh. You scrape your foot against a tree trunk, muttering every curse you know. You feel the eyes of someone watching. You. It's the Reeve, the Lord's overseer. He doesn't smile. He just squints, spits, and walks away. You hate him. Back in the village, someone is shouting. You follow the noise. A pig got loose again. It's rampaging through someone's garden, knocking over baskets and eating the winter leeks. 3 people are chasing it. One trips and lands face first in the compost pile. The pig squeals in triumph. You don't help. You're too tired. You keep walking. You stop at the well and take a drink. The bucket groans on the rope. The water is cold, bitter, and slightly green. Still, it feels like heaven going down. You take another sip. A flea crawls across your hand. You flick it away and move on. Your next job is helping with the thatch. One of the huts lost part of its roof in the last storm. You climb up using a wobbly wooden ladder while holding a bundle of straw under one arm. The ladder sways. You grab the beam above you and pray to St. Jude. He's for lost causes. The roof is slippery. You anchor yourself with a rope and start laying new straw over the hole. Your hands move on their own. Tie, press, stuff, repeat. Your fingers go numb again. The wind howls across the rooftops. You shiver and look out at the village. It's ugly, smoky, muddy. Every house leans slightly to one side. Every path is flooded. Every dog is thin, but it's yours. Sort of. You finish patching the roof, climb down, and nearly fall into a puddle. You catch yourself, laugh once, then stop. Laughing takes energy. You wipe your hands on your tunic. More dirt, more smell. You've stopped caring. You look up. The sun is already dipping behind the trees. You think about the man who died this morning. You wonder if he knew it was coming. You wonder if you'll feel it when it's your turn. By the time you return from the fields, something feels off. The air is colder. Not just cold, tight, like it's holding its breath. The wind moves strangely. The dogs aren't barking. That's how you know something's wrong. In the village, silence means trouble. You round the corner of the baker's hut and see the gathering. 8 people, maybe more, huddled near Agnes's cottage. Whispers curl in the air like smoke. No one shouts. No one moves closer. They just watch. You step in quietly, trying not to draw attention. She's standing in the doorway. Agnes. She looks the same as she did yesterday. Gray shawl, cracked hands, deep eyes that seem to know things. She's always been kind to you. She gave your brother herbs for his cough once. But now she's standing still, very still, with her arms crossed tight and her back against the door like she's holding something inside. Someone throws garlic. At her feet, the it bounces once, then rolls into the mud. She cursed the calf. A voice mutters behind you. You turn your head slightly. It's Thomas the miller. His face is pale. His hands twitch like he's cold. The animal was fine yesterday. Then it started bleeding from the nose. No reason. You don't say anything. Calves die all the time. Bad oats. Worms. Too much rain. Too little sun. But you know it doesn't matter. Once people smell fear, they look for someone to blame. And Agnes lives alone and grows herbs and doesn't smile very often. She was talking to herself in the woods. Someone adds, she walks without shoes. She burned something in a pot last full moon. They're stacking stories like firewood, building a pyre without realizing it. You step back. This isn't your fight. You glance at Agnes again. She's breathing, but not deeply. You wonder if she's praying. You wonder if she's angry. You wonder if maybe, just maybe, she did do something. Your mother told you stories when you were small. About witches with bird bones in their sleeves and frogs in their mouths. About women who whispered to trees and cursed men with just a glance. You used to laugh, but your cousin grew a second toe once. A real one. It curled over the top of his foot like a claw. It fell off a month later. No one ever figured out why. You feel something crawl up your leg. You slap it. A flea. Of course. Back at the circle, someone steps forward. It's Martha, the brewer's wife. She holds a sprig of rosemary in one hand and a small wooden cross in the other. She mumbles a prayer. Her voice shakes. Agnes doesn't flinch that a child begins to cry, shrill and sudden. The mother scoops her up and backs away, as if crying might be contagious. Someone spits. You feel your hands twitch. You're not sure if it's from fear, cold, or instinct. This isn't how it always is, but it happens. Once every few seasons, someone crosses an invisible line. Too strange, too quiet, too unlucky. The last time, it was an old man who claimed he saw angels in his barley. He vanished after a storm. Some said he drowned. Others said he was taken or burned. You start walking away. Slowly. You don't want to be the one who watched, or the one who accused, or the one who said nothing. As you pass the well, you see the priest watching from a distance. He doesn't move either, just stares. Later that evening, there's a bundle of dried flowers on Agnes's doorstep. A warning. The garlic is still there, half buried in the mud. You sit near the hearth and pretend nothing happened. Your brother talks about chickens. Your uncle grumbles about the cold. Your mother stirs the stew 3 times clockwise, always clockwise, and adds a pinch of salt before whispering something in Latin. You don't think she knows what the words mean, but she says them every night. Just in case, you stare at the flames. They hiss and crackle, like they're trying to speak, and deep down, you feel no one is safe here. Not really. Not if the wrong bird flies overhead. Not if the rain comes too soon. Not if someone looks at you just a little too long. You don't remember sitting down, but here you are, back on a log near the edge of the fields, knees aching, fingers raw, and stomach growling loud enough to scare the birds that it's time for the midday meal. You call it that, but it's more of a ritual than a reward. Something you do because not doing it would probably kill you faster. You pull out your ration from the sack tied to your belt. A small cloth bundle. Inside is a chunk of bread so hard it could be used as a weapon. You knock it gently against the log. It thuds, still edible, probably. You gnaw on the edge, trying not to break a tooth. The crust tastes like smoke and salt. The middle is dry, but there's a slightly sour chew to it that lets you know it's aged. You chew anyway, slowly, thoughtfully, like it's your last meal. It might be. Someone sits beside you. Thomas, the Thatcher's son. He nods once and unwraps his own food. A lump of gray cheese and a withered pear. You try not to stare. It's rude. But your eyes linger anyway. That he sees you looking and breaks the cheese in half. Offers you a piece. You hesitate. Then you take it. It tastes like foot. But it's warm. Real food. Real sharing. That means something. You reach into your tunic and pull out a small pouch. A surprise. An onion. You found it behind the storage bin this morning. Might have rolled out of someone's basket. Might have been yours last week. It's soft around the edges, but still sharp when you bite it. You break off pieces with your fingers and pass half to Thomas. He doesn't speak, but nods again. That's enough that you're halfway through the bread when the scratching starts. You ignore it at first, but it grows worse, inside your sleeve. Behind your knee. On your neck. You try to be subtle. Rub your elbow against your ribs. Reach casually. Behind your ear. But it doesn't help. The fleas are feasting today. You pull up your pant leg. 3 red bites, already swollen. A 4th one crawling. You swipe at it. Mississippi scratch. 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 The others are doing it too. You watch them while chewing. Grown men scratching like hounds, twitching and slapping at invisible itches. No one says a word. It's normal that it's always like this. You remember hearing once that the fleas die in winter. They don't. They just get hungrier. Someone lets out a groan. Found one in my eyebrow this morning. says a voice. You all laugh. Not because it's funny, but because laughing is easier than crying. And you've cried enough this week that a young boy runs past, barefoot, holding a bowl full of watery porridge. He trips. The bowl flips. The porridge splatters into the dirt. He stares at it, then picks up the bowl, scoops some of the mess back in, and walks off without a word. You chew slower after that. The bell from the church tower rings. Two dull clangs that meal's over. You finish the last bite of bread. It's mostly crust now, but you chew until your jaw hurts. You rub your stomach. It doesn't feel full, just less empty. You rinse your hands in the barrel. There's a dead leaf floating in it. You push it aside and dip your fingers. The cold bites your knuckles. You wipe your hands on your tunic. They come away dirtier than before. Back to work. But first, you pause. Just for a breath. You close your eyes and listen. Crows. Wind. Someone coughing in the distance. And beneath it all, the sound of chewing, of scratching, of people pretending this is enough. You walk to the church because it's Sunday at least. You think it's Sunday. The days blur together when the weather doesn't change, when the food never changes, when your bones ache the same way every morning. But people are walking that way, slow, stiff, quiet. So you follow. The path is lined with puddles. You step in each one, not because you want to, but because they're everywhere. Your feet are soaked before you reach the chapel steps. The door is crooked and heavy. You pull it open and are swallowed into the cold stone hushed. It's darker inside than you remember. The church always smells the same. Wax, old wood, and wet cloth. There are no pews, just uneven benches. You sit near the back, not because you're ashamed, but because you want a quick escape if the roof ever collapses. It looks like it might. The priest is already there, murmuring to himself. You think it's Latin. It could also be snoring. No one here speaks Latin. Not even him, probably you. Bow your head. You don't pray right away. You never know how to start. You ask for food? For less pain? For your sister's cough to go away? For the rats to leave your storage alone? It feels greedy, asking for so much. So you say nothing. Instead, you stare at the mural on the far wall that it's cracked and faded, but you know it by heart. A demon chewing a man's leg while a saint looks on disapprovingly. Another figure is being boiled alive. Someone else is upside down in a fiery pit. You think that one might be a merchant. His hat looks expensive. The priest begins the sermon. His voice echoes across the empty space like wind in a cave. You catch a few words: sin, grace, fire, obedience, plague. All the greatest hits. People nod solemnly. A baby cries. A dog barks outside and is quickly silenced. You shift on the bench. Your legs are stiff. Your stomach growls. You close your eyes and pretend you understand that a woman next to you makes the sign of the cross with her left hand. You wonder if that's allowed. You wonder if anyone notices that a gust of wind slips in under the church door. It smells like ash and rotting hay. The candles flicker. Someone sneezes. The priest coughs, then keeps talking like nothing happened. Your mind drifts. You think about the man who died in the fields. You think about Agnes, still alone in her hut. You think about the lice in your blanket and the aching in your jaw, and whether or not St. Cuthbert cares about people like you. The priest raises his hands. The blessing. At last, you lower your head again, whisper something under your breath, just in case, and get ready to leave. But you don't rush. You sit a moment longer in the quiet. Not because it's holy, but because it's the warmest place you've been. All day, the sun doesn't really set. It disappears. One moment it's there, dull and distant behind gray clouds, and the next it's just gone. You trudge back to your hut as the cold settles in like a curse. The air turns wet and sharp, the kind that sneaks through cloth, past skin, into bone. You wrap your arms around yourself and walk faster. Inside, the fire has died. Again, you kneel beside the hearth, strike flint against steel, once, twice, 5 times. A spark catches. The straw smolders. You blow gently, praying it doesn't fizzle. Out like yesterday. It doesn't. A small flame crawls to life. It throws just enough light to make the shadows twitch. You feed it twigs, then branches, until the room glows a little. Just enough to see the mold creeping up the wall and the pile of rags where your brother is sleeping. Your mother is already stirring the pot. Stew, if you can call it that. Mostly water, with scraps of carrot and something that might have been meat a week ago. It smells like boiled rope. You sit beside her without speaking. The hut groans as the wind picks up. Rain begins, soft at first, then harder, tapping on the roof like impatient fingers. You glance up and spot the familiar drip forming in the corner. You place a cracked bowl beneath it. You don't bother emptying yesterday's water first. Dinner is served. One ladle each. You sip slowly, burning your tongue on the first try. You keep going anyway. The heat is worth it. Your brother coughs mid-spoonful and spills half of his into his lap. No one says anything. There's no second helping. After the meal, your uncle tells a story, same one as last week. Something about a dog that outran a fire. You've heard it 20 times. You listen anyway. Not because it's good, but because it means he's still alive and talking and not coughing like the others. Your cousin snores in the corner, curled around a pile of hay. The hut smells like damp wool, burnt onion, and unwashed skin. You scratch your leg. Fleas again. You gave up fighting them 3 summers ago. Your mother mutters prayers under her breath. Names of saints, old blessings, fragments of Latin no one understands. You join in, just with a whisper. Just in case someone's listening, you lie down next to your straw pile. The chicken is back. It clucks once and settles beside you. Warm and strange. You stare at the ceiling. The fire pops once. The wind howls. You think about today, the man in the field, the garlic at Agnes's door, the taste of cheese. You think about tomorrow, the same. Or worse, your eyes sting, but you don't cry. Crying takes energy. You're too tired for that. Instead, you watch the smoke rise. It curls toward the hole in the roof and slips out into the sky. You wonder where it goes. Maybe somewhere better. Cleaner. Warmer. Your back aches. Your feet are wet. Your stomach growls again. You pull the blanket over your shoulders, curl in tight, and press your face into the cloth. It smells like everything and nothing. Your brother coughs again. It sounds worse than yesterday. You pretend not to notice. You close your eyes. The wind whistles through the cracks in the walls. Something scratches at the door. A rat, probably. Or a spirit. You'd welcome either at this point. You don't dream. Dreaming would require rest. You drift instead. Between thoughts. Between cold. Between the creak of the beams and the itch behind your knee. You don't know what time it is. You don't care. Night has fallen, and so have you. And while you drift to sleep wrapped in rags, aching from the cold and the hunger. Somewhere far above your station, behind palace walls and beneath jeweled crowns, a different kind of struggle was taking shape. One fought not with mud and straw, but with bloodlines, betrayal, and the weight of a kingdom. She was born in a castle soaked with rain and stone. Matilda, daughter of Henry I of England, came into the world in 1102, wrapped not in swaddling cloth, but in expectation. From the moment she cried her first, the world whispered of her lineage. Her father was a king. Her mother, a queen of Scottish blood and saintly reputation. Royalty filled her cradle. But behind the silks and ceremony, a quiet truth lingered. She was a girl, and girls did not inherit thrones. Still, Henry I saw something in her, something sharp. While her brother, William, was destined to rule, Matilda was sent away. At the age of 8, she crossed the sea to Germany, offered in marriage to the Holy Roman Emperor, Henry V. It was a union forged in politics, not affection, yet she carried the crown with poise far beyond her years. The imperial court was colder than England, harder, more formal. Yet Matilda adapted. She studied languages, learned to navigate the brutal logic of European power, and walked beside one of the most feared rulers in Christendom as his empress. When she rode through towns in her gold-embroidered cloak, people bowed to her with genuine reverence. In their eyes, she was not just a noblewoman. She was sovereign, but titles can be illusions. After 11 years, Henry V died, sick, bitter, and without an heir. Matilda, now in her early 20s, was left stranded in a foreign court. The crown slid from her head the moment he was buried. She was no longer empress. She was a widow, and worse, a pawn once more. So she returned to England, and everything had changed. Her brother, the golden-haired heir of Henry I, had drowned in a shipwreck. His body never recovered from the icy waters of the English Channel. There was no clear successor now, just barons with sharpened knives, and a king with no legitimate son. Matilda, suddenly, was no longer just a noblewoman. She was the only surviving child of a king, and her father, faced with growing pressure, did something no English monarch had done before, that he named his daughter the heir to the throne, and the storm began to gather. When Matilda returned to England, she was no longer the radiant empress of Europe. She was a widow, veiled in black, stepping onto gray shores that no longer felt like home. The royal court barely recognized her. She had been gone for over a decade, and the girl who once left in silks now returned with a steel gaze and foreign manners. Whispers followed her. Some admired her dignity. Others feared her pride. But Henry I had no time for whispers. His only legitimate son, William, had drowned in the sinking of the White Ship, a disaster that gutted the royal bloodline. Dozens of young nobles died that night, swallowed by the Channel's freezing waves. And with them, the future of the dynasty vanished. Henry I was left with one choice. Matilda. He summoned his barons. Many of them flinched, hesitated, protested behind closed doors. A woman? To rule England? It was unthinkable. No king had ever passed the crown to a daughter. But Henry was not a man to tolerate disobedience. He forced their hands point one by one. They swore an oath. They bent the knee to Matilda. They promised to support her as the next monarch of England. She said little during these ceremonies. But her silence was not submission, it was calculation. She understood better than anyone how fragile promises were in the halls of power. Oaths, like crowns, could be stolen. To strengthen her claim, her father arranged a new marriage. This time to Geoffrey of Anjou, a teenager with ambition, a sharp tongue, and a family crest bearing golden lions. The union was political, strategic, and loveless. Matilda disliked him almost immediately. That he was impulsive, arrogant, 10 years her junior. And worse, his lands were at constant odds with the Norman barons of England. The marriage fractured what little trust she'd earned. Nobles began to whisper again, this time louder, she's not English anymore. She's too proud. She married a boy with no crown. Still, Matilda moved forward. She bore Geoffrey 3 sons. She built alliances through quiet letters, sealed with wax and written in a Latin hand few could match. She watched her enemies closely. She knew many of the barons who had sworn loyalty would not keep their word. She prepared herself for war, long before the swords were drawn. Then, in 1135, her father died. There was no coronation, no crown placed on her head, no trumpet to signal her rise. Instead, while Matilda was hundreds of miles away in Anjou, her cousin Stephen, charming, quick, and utterly treacherous, rode to London, declared himself king, and seized the throne. With the backing of the church, the barons who had sworn their oaths, they bent the knee to him instead. Matilda was cut out of history before she had even stepped into it. But she didn't break. She didn't disappear. She simply began to fight. Stephen of Blois moved fast. The moment Henry I's body turned cold, Stephen crossed the English Channel under cover of fog. He rode hard, cloaked in charm and ambition, and arrived in London before Matilda could even prepare her claim. His timing was perfect. His excuses rehearsed. His allies ready. The Archbishop of Canterbury, perhaps nervous, perhaps bribed, anointed him with holy oil. The barons, exhausted from Henry's rule and fearful of civil war, accepted him, not because they believed he had the right, but because he was there, and because Matilda was not. Stephen was crowned King of England. It was theft, wrapped in ceremony. A smiling betrayal. That Matilda's fury was immediate, but contained. She understood that rage without strategy was useless. Instead of screaming, she sent letters, dozens of them, calling in favors, reminding lords of their sworn oaths, warning that the throne did not belong to Stephen, that he was a usurper, a traitor, a thief. Some listened. Most hesitated. She had one key advantage. Her half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, a powerful nobleman, fiercely loyal to her, and dangerous. When cornered, with his backing and her husband Geoffrey's military strength in Normandy, Matilda began to build a resistance. Still, the path was narrow. She was a woman, and not just any woman. An educated, sharp-tongued, foreign-married, ambitious woman. Traits that would be praised in a man were condemned in her. Proud, cold, arrogant, unfeminine. But Matilda did not soften. She did not beg. She prepared for war. By 1139, she crossed into England with a small force and landed at Arundel Castle. Stephen, unchallenged for 4 years, now faced a true threat. His reaction was confused. First he laid siege to the castle. Then, inexplicably, he allowed Matilda to leave unharmed. Some say it was chivalry. Others, fear. Either way, it was a mistake. The Civil War had begun. The country would call it the anarchy, and it would live up to its name. For nearly 2 decades, England spiraled into chaos. Castles burned, towns fell, famine spread. Baron fought baron. Allegiances flipped overnight. Armies marched in mud. Villages were pillaged by both sides. No one was safe, and no one ruled Matilda's. Forces were smart, but limited. She didn't have the numbers to sweep the kingdom, but she had one weapon Stephen couldn't match: resilience. And then, in 1141, everything changed at the Battle of Lincoln. Stephen was captured, dragged from the battlefield in chains. He was thrown into a Bristol prison for a brief, glittering moment. Matilda had the throne in her grasp. She entered London with her head high, ready to be crowned. But the city turned on her, not because she lost a battle, but because of how she walked, because of how she spoke, commanding, unwavering, because she didn't smile enough, didn't flatter enough, didn't pretend to be grateful for what was already hers. The people of London rioted. They shouted her out of the city. Matilda, the rightful heir, the near empress, the near queen, fled. Her crown dissolved in smoke and dust. Stephen, released in a prisoner exchange, returned to the throne. The Civil War resumed. Matilda had fought harder than any monarch before her. And still, she had no crown. But she wasn't finished. By the winter of 1142, Matilda was no longer chasing a crown. She was clinging to survival. Her position had crumbled. The people of London had driven her out. Stephen had escaped captivity. Allies were thinning. Supplies were low. And now, she was trapped, snowed in at Oxford Castle, encircled by Stephen's forces. The siege began quietly. His army arrived under cover of darkness, their torches flickering between bare trees. They surrounded the castle, cut off food lines, and waited. They didn't need to storm the gates. They could starve her out. Cold would do the killing. Hunger would do the rest. Inside, Matilda refused to panic. She rationed the grain. She walked the icy halls in silence, pausing to rest her fingers on the stone walls. She listened to the wind curling through the arrow slits, to the sound of men coughing in corners, to the scratching of rats beneath the floorboards. Days passed. Then weeks. Snow piled high against the castle walls. The river froze. Trees cracked under their own weight. Inside, candles burned low and voices grew quieter. Hunger makes people quiet, but not Matilda. She held meetings daily, cloaked in wool, her breath visible in the frigid air. She gave orders, issued letters, read psalms, wrote in the margins, planned. She would not be captured again, and she would not die in Stephen's noose. Then came the idea, a daring, mad, impossible idea. There was one weakness in Stephen's siege. The snow blanketed the ground, masking movement. And Matilda, wrapped in white, could vanish into it. One moonless night, she made her move, dressed head to toe in white. White cloak, white hood, pale gloves. She stepped out of the castle walls with 3 companions. They slipped through a postern gate, a hidden back exit once used by servants and messengers, and no torches. No words, just breath and snow. They walked silently across the frozen river, each step a gamble. The ice groaned beneath them, but held. On the far bank, sentries stood guard, shivering, half asleep, blind in the dark. Matilda didn't run, she walked. Slowly, calmly, as if she belonged to the night itself. One misstep, and they'd be seen. One sound, and it would be over, but no one noticed. They passed through the enemy line like ghosts, melted into the forest, disappeared into the dark. By dawn, she was gone. The next morning, Stephen's men stormed the castle, only to find ashes, footprints, and silence. The empress had vanished. The legend was born. Even her enemies whispered about it. They said the snow had swallowed her. They said she flew. But she had done something far greater than vanish. She had survived. The escape from Oxford didn't win her the throne, but it saved her myth. It proved, once again, that Matilda was not like other nobles. She was not fragile. She was not beaten. She would bend, she would bleed, but she would not break. And yet, legend does not guarantee victory. The war dragged on. Years passed in a slow grind of skirmishes, burned fields, shifting allegiances. Matilda's position weakened. Her supporters grew restless. The people, ordinary, starving, battered by endless war, no longer cared who sat on the throne. They wanted peace, food, sleep. In 1148, Matilda returned to Normandy, not in exile, but by choice. She had fought her war, and now it was her son's turn. By 1148, the war had bled her dry. Matilda was still alive, still dangerous in rumor, still spoken of in frightened tones by Stephen's court. But in truth, her power was fading. She had outlasted the momentum. The barons were tired. The land itself was tired. And even her most loyal allies had begun to look elsewhere, for peace, for opportunity, for someone younger. Her campaign had collapsed not from a single defeat, but from exhaustion. Not long after her escape from Oxford, she lost control of London again, then Winchester, then most of the southwest. One by one, her castles fell or turned coat. Lords who had once sworn loyalty now wrote carefully neutral letters. Some apologized. Some didn't bother. She didn't chase them. She simply endured. She returned to Normandy, where Geoffrey, her husband, still prickly and proud, had gained new territory. Their relationship remained more treaty than marriage, but it held. They no longer argued. They barely spoke. But Matilda found purpose elsewhere. In her son. Henry was 15 now. Tall, sharp, temperamental, and hungry for power. He had his father's fire and his mother's mind. Where Geoffrey barked orders, Henry calculated. Where Matilda had been stiff and proud, Henry knew how to charm. He was her second chance. But first, there was one final compromise to make. In 1153, Stephen's only son, Eustace, died suddenly. Some said it was illness. Others called it divine punishment. Whatever the cause, Stephen was shaken. His claim no longer had a future. And with it, his taste for war dissolved. Henry, now 20, landed in England with a small army. His reputation had grown. Even Stephen's own allies had begun to whisper his name as the inevitable heir. But there was no great battle, no final siege, no thunderous victory. There was only negotiation. Matilda wasn't at the table, but her fingerprints were on every page. The Treaty of Wallingford was signed in late 1153 that Stephen would remain king. Until his death, Henry would be named as his heir. It was peace without triumph. Matilda would never wear a crown, never sit on the throne her father promised. History would not remember her as queen, but she had done what no woman in England had ever done before. She had forced the kingdom to admit it needed her son, and through him, her legacy would live. Matilda did not return to England. Her war was over. The throne had passed beyond her reach. But her son had won what she could not, and that was enough. Back in Normandy, she found a kind of peace. Not comfort, not praise, but stability. She was still empress to some, lady of the English to others. Titles clung to her like old dust, but they no longer mattered. What mattered was Henry. She became his advisor, his strategist, his anchor. She wrote to him often, long letters filled with caution, subtle criticism, and motherly advice dressed as political commentary. She knew the court, knew the barons, knew the value of patience and the cost of arrogance. And Henry listened, most of the time. When Stephen died in 1154, Henry Plantagenet was crowned King Henry II of England. He was just 21, the first of the Angevin kings. His reign would be fierce, ambitious, and often cruel. But it would last, and it would never have happened without Matilda. She didn't attend his coronation, but her influence was there, in the treaties he honored, in the enemies he spared, in the way he trusted his own judgment over tradition. She had taught him that, not with lessons, but with her life. Matilda remained in Rouen, where she oversaw courts, settled disputes, and occasionally ruled in Henry's absence. Local barons came to her for wisdom. Monks copied her letters. She moved through halls with quiet dignity, no longer needing armor or thrones. She also repaired churches, donated to abbeys, supported scholars, not for glory, but because she could, because power, once denied, had finally returned to her. Steady and silent, she had no crown, but she had influence. She had become the architect of a dynasty. her descendants would rule England for centuries. Henry II, Richard the Lionheart, King John, the Plantagenets, the Lancasters, the Yorks, all born of her line, all born of the woman England refused to crown. But history has a habit of rewarding the wrong people. Stephen, the usurper, is remembered, if at all, for the chaos of his reign. Henry is remembered for his empire, his temper, and his wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Matilda is forgotten or mistaken for someone else, sometimes reduced to a name in a timeline. Or worse, a cautionary tale. Too proud, they say. Too forceful, too ambitious. They don't say that about kings, but Matilda never begged for history's approval. She didn't need to be liked. She needed to be heard. And she was in 1167. She fell ill. She was 65, old by medieval standards. Her body, once so unbending, began to fail. She spent her final weeks in a monastery outside Rouen. It was quiet, peaceful. The monks respected her. The locals left offerings at the gates. She died in her sleep. And riots. No coronation, just stillness. She was buried at Beck Abbey. Her tombstone read, "Great by birth, greater by marriage, greatest in her offspring. Here lies Matilda, the daughter, wife, and mother of Henry." It was meant as praise, but it missed the truth. She was not great because of the men around her. She was great because she refused to vanish. She fought not just for power, but for precedent. She shattered the silence around royal women. She forced England to stare its own fears in the face. The fear of female rule, of broken tradition, of strength that refused to soften. And though the throne never bore her weight, it bowed beneath her footsteps. And while kings rose and fell, while crowns passed from hand to hand, far from the courts and castles, another story unfolded. One not written in ink or war, but in silence, stone, and surrender. Not all power wears a crown. Some is buried alive, and still remembered that it begins in silence. Not the kind that follows conversation or sits between raindrops, but a silence older than language, thick, slow, and waiting. A kind of stillness that lives inside stone in a village forgotten by maps. And monks, where gulls circle the cliffs and the wind smells of salt and bone, a church stands alone. Small, weathered, its stones worn smooth by time and prayer. No bells, no choir, just a single wooden door, bound in iron and rumor. And one morning, without warning, a girl walks in. She wears no crown, no veil, no name that survives. She enters without hesitation, and one stops her. The priest watches. The villagers whisper, but no one dares speak her name aloud, as if doing so might draw her fate upon them. Her hands are pale, her eyes quiet. She says little, only that she is ready, and they understand what she means. She is to be enclosed it was not unheard of. Not then. In the medieval world, some women, driven by visions, sorrow, or silence, chose to be sealed inside stone cells, attached to churches, to be bricked in, alive, forever. Anchoresses, they were called, living saints. Or lunatics, they would enter a room and never leave again. And this girl, this soft ghost in linen, had chosen it willingly. The rite was simple and terrible. She received communion as if preparing for death. Last rites were given. Psalms were sung. And then, under gray skies and the watch of her village, the final wall was built, stone by stone. The entrance was closed, and no door. No window to the world. Only one tiny opening remained, no larger than a hand's width, facing the altar inside the church, where she could hear Mass and receive bread and water. That was her view. Forever point one window to God, another to the graveyard. The villagers lingered long after the final stone was placed. No one spoke. The wind howled over the cliffs, carrying the scent of sea and soil. A girl had vanished, and a voice had entered the walls. From that day on, they said the church felt heavier, like it was holding something, or someone, a soul humming. Beneath the stone, inside, the anchoress knelt and breathed. The villagers called it a ritual, though none of them had ever seen it before. There were prayers, yes. Hymns sung in wavering voices. A few candles lit against the wind. But what took place that morning felt older than the church itself, like it had been whispered through generations long before parchment ever caught ink. The priest stood at the altar, hands trembling as he read from the book. Latin rolled off his tongue, heavy and slow, as if each word had to be carried uphill. He read as if for the dead, and in a way, he was. The girl knelt in front of him, pale, still. She didn't blink, didn't fidget. Her hair was wrapped in a plain cloth, her hands folded against her chest. No gold, no rings, no possessions. She had left them behind, along with her name. Her funeral began, though she still breathed. The villagers watched from the shadows of the chapel. Some crossed themselves. Some wept quietly. Others simply stared, uncertain if they were witnessing holiness or madness. The priest sprinkled water on her brow, anointed her hands with oil, whispered blessings, called on saints and martyrs and the mother of sorrows. The girl never moved. Then came the white shroud, not for burial, for the life she was leaving behind. They wrapped it gently over her shoulders, her arms, her back, until she resembled a bride, or a ghost. And then the procession began. Two monks walked ahead with a candle and a cross. She followed behind them, barefoot on the cold stone floor. The wind had picked up. The church groaned as if it knew what was coming. They led her to the far side of the building, where the anchor hold had been prepared, a cell just wide enough to lie down in, with walls thick as a tomb. Inside, there was a prayer bench, a Bible, a single iron dish, and two slits, one facing the altar, the other the graveyard. Nothing else. This would be her home. Until death. She stepped inside without hesitation. The priest stood at the threshold. He placed a final blessing on the stones, kissed the book, and stepped back. Then the wall began. Stone by stone. One man laid the mortar. Another placed the bricks. It was not loud. It was not fast. It was deliberate, rhythmic, funereal. The villagers didn't move. They watched as the light in the cell grew thinner. The girl sat down, then knelt, then bowed her head. Only her silhouette remained, framed by the shrinking doorway. When the final stone was placed, the world held its breath, and then it was done. A wall now stood where a doorway had been. The crowd dispersed slowly, as if leaving a burial mound. No one spoke. No one laughed. Some touched the stones as they passed, as if hoping to feel warmth through them. Inside, the anchoress adjusted. To the dark, the air was stale, but not suffocating. She pressed her hands to the cold wall in front of her. It did not move, did not speak, but she felt something, the stillness, the weight, the beginning. She closed her eyes and inhaled. This was not punishment. This was devotion. She had chosen to vanish, not to escape the world, but to carry it, quietly, prayer by prayer, for those who could not. Outside, life resumed. The priest returned to his sermons. The villagers returned to their plows and sickness and rumors. Seasons shifted. Children grew. The stone wall remained unchanged. But every morning, bread was passed through the slit in the wall. Every evening, someone whispered a request, and inside, the girl, now faceless, now nameless, whispered back in silence. Silence, it turns out, is not empty. It bends and breathes. It moves through the cell like wind moves through trees, soft at first, then sharp, then gone again. In her first weeks behind the wall, the anchoress learned that silence had layers. There was the silence of stone, the silence of skin, the silence that waited for something, and the silence that simply was. Her days were measured not in hours, but in light and sound. The morning bell, the priest's voice at Mass, the shadows that crept across the small prayer bench, the warmth that touched the corner of the wall. For exactly 7 heartbeats each afternoon before fading, she prayed, not in words at first, but in rhythm. Breath, pause, breath. She let the silence shape her thoughts, then lift them like smoke toward the sky. Sometimes she whispered, sometimes she wept, but mostly she listened. And in listening, she began to hear, not voices exactly, but memories that did not belong to her. A child crying beneath a tree, a mother singing by a fire, the rush of wind over a battlefield long buried. She did not try to explain them. She simply wrote on scraps of parchment passed to her by the priests. Apprentice, she scribbled lines that came in waves, fragments of visions, dreams, confessions that had no beginning or end. She did not sign them. She folded them neatly and slipped them back through the slit. They spread. The priest read them aloud during evening prayers. The The villagers copied them. Traders took them downriver. Point one parchment, stained with ash and bearing only 5 words. There is fire beneath stillness. Found its way into a bishop's library. Another ended up in the hands of a knight's widow, who claimed the words healed her grief, and no one knew who wrote them. Only that they came from the wall, inside the cell. The anchoress aged slowly, her hair thinned, her back stiffened. Her breath grew shallower in winter, but her mind was sharp. She remembered things she had never seen: mountains, cities, saints. She imagined what Rome might smell like, what snow might sound like falling on marble. She dreamt of deserts, and stars, and seas that did not end. Visitors came, not to see her, but to speak through the stone. A man whose son had vanished in the forest. A woman whose husband struck her when drunk. A girl who believed she had swallowed a demon. They spoke in whispers, and though the anchoress rarely replied, they left changed. Some swore they heard her voice in their sleep. Others claimed their illnesses vanished overnight. A few returned with gifts: candles, berries, a polished stone shaped like a heart. She accepted none. She asked for nothing. She became legend. Children dared each other to knock on her wall. Merchants asked if she was alive or dead. Travelers lit candles outside her window and moved on in silence. Inside, she kept writing. One day, the priest asked if she would record her life, her testimony. She declined, not out of pride, but because she no longer thought of herself as separate from the stones around her. She was not a person, not exactly. She was a presence, not saint, not prisoner, something in between. Time softened. She forgot the names of seasons, forgot how old she was, forgot how long it had been since she'd spoken aloud. But she remembered the warmth of her mother's hands, the weight of bread in her palm, the sky just before it rained, and in remembering, she smiled. Only once, then closed her eyes and listened. The wind outside carried the sound of waves crashing far below, and the silence wrapped itself around her. Again, like a veil made of sleep, the wall stands solid, unbroken stone between 2 worlds. Yet beneath its weight, murmurs pass like wind caught in a hollow log. Each morning, a pale beam of light slants through the altar slit, touching the anchoress's hands as she presses them against the cool surface. Through this narrow opening, life seeps in: bread, water, messages scrawled on scraps of parchment. Villagers gather at irregular hours, ashamed to be seen, yet drawn by need. A mother clutching her fevered child pauses at the slit, sliding through a damp loaf of bread and a note: rest here. Blessings. Inside, the anchoress offers silent prayers. A week later, the child's fever breaks. The mother returns one dawn and hears only the hush. She leaves a ribbon. A traveling scholar arrives next, a man with a cloak threadbare but eyes bright. He slips a folded page beneath the wall, a riddle in Latin that asks, "What burns without flame?" The anchoress smiles to herself, then writes through the slit, "Truth," and folds the answer into his hand when he returns. He departs at dusk, nodding as if he has met a dreamed. 18 midday. Rain hammers the roof. The anchoress feels each drop's rhythm, then hears coughing beyond her wall. A widow with cough and worry presses her hands into the stone, begging for relief. Inside, the anchoress breathes a prayer, then slips a small pouch of dried herbs through the slit. The next morning, the widow returns in silence, her cough gone. She bows her head, leaves a sprig of rosemary, and retreats without a word. Not all visitors seek healing. Some come to confess sins too dark for daylight. A young man once crept close at night, hands trembling as he slid a letter through. He admitted to theft, betrayal, to a life he no longer wanted. He asked only for release from guilt. The anchoress read every line, then placed her hand over the letter and whispered an unknown prayer. The young man wept softly, folded the parchment, and walked away into the darkness, lighter, though still burdened by his own memory. From the outside, these interactions feel miraculous. A brick wall that speaks. A woman who listens to ghosts. Traders swear they've seen her shadow flicker when candles burn low. Children leave flowers at the church door, convinced she blooms. Behind the stones, inside, however, the anchoress knows the real work is quiet endurance. Each message, each gift, is carried through a slit smaller than her hand. Her world is measured in these gestures. tender exchanges that stitch her to the living. She keeps a careful record. On a worn wooden board beside her bench, she etches each visitor's name, date, and need. Faded lines chart the seasons of human sorrow. Marion, fourth bloom, sick calf. Eldrick, second frost, stolen cloak. Hester, full moon, broken heart. Years pass. The records grow long. Hands that once trembled now slide parchment through with confidence. The anchoress greets each whisper with the same calm devotion. One day, a stranger arrives, not in haste, but with measured steps. He is tall, cloaked in fine wool, and carries a sealed letter adorned with a royal seal, an emblem of golden lilies. The villagers gasp. Kings do not visit anchor holds. The anchoress waits. Through the slit, she feels the letter slide across. She prays silently, then reaches out, traces the seal with her fingertip, and tucks the missive under her bench. That night, Henri Plantagenet himself writes her name in the margin of history books as a mystery. He never visits again, but the herbs she provided save one of his own. One more thread woven between crown and wall. Occasionally, a village child returns to ask if the woman is lonely. Wordlessly, the anchoress touches the wall. The child hears, if. She listens, an almost imperceptible hum, like a lullaby from below. She heads home, telling no one. Through all these whispers, one truth emerges. The wall does not imprison her. It amplifies her presence, and though she dwells alone, her solitude is a chorus of voices calling in, changing the world one silent exchange at a time. One morning, the food stops coming to no bread, no water, no parchment with prayers or wisdom. Nothing passes through the altar slit. The villagers whisper over cold porridge and half-drunk ale that something has changed inside the wall. They gather hesitantly at the church door, first in pairs, then in small groups, then in fearful crowds, none daring to knock, but all hoping for a sign. Inside, there is only silence, not the silence she embraced, but a silence that announces absence. The priest, whose hair has grown white, with seasons, steps forward. He touches the stones with trembling fingers and senses a hollow echo that was never there before. He prays at the threshold, hesitating, then steps back. The villagers watch. No one moves. No one speaks. Days pass, still no sound. No flutter of parchment. No breath. No tapping of fingers against the stones. They decide to open the cell. A laborer removes the exterior stones one by one, careful, reverent. A carpenter pries loose the inner brackets. A crowd clusters beyond the barriers, straining to see at last. The final stone is lifted. The doorway yawns open. A cold gust of air pours into the chapel, like wind from a distant cave. Inside, the chamber is empty. The prayer bench stands alone. The Bible lies on its stand, untouched. The iron dish is still and silent. The two slits gape like blind eyes at no woman. No body. No skeleton, no parchment. Only one item remains. A small, folded piece of ragged cloth, pinned to the back wall by a rusted nail. On it, traced in a trembling hand, are 3 words, "Gone to listen." The villagers stare. Some weep. Others fall to their knees. A few turn away, unwilling to see what cannot be unseen. Rumors spread faster than winter fire. They say she became the wind. They say she walked into the rock and melted into its heart. They say she rode with the gulls over the cliffs. They say she slipped through cracks no one else could find. A handful claim they heard her last whisper, carried on a storm. There is more beyond the wall. The priest collects the cloth and places it in the church's relic box. He locks the cell door and seals the chapel windows. He writes nothing in the parish register. He offers no sermon. Words fail him. Years later, travelers mention the empty cell. Pilgrims leave candles lit at the altar. Young lovers carve initials. In the doorframe, beggars press coins into cracks where the cloth once hung. And each full moon, some swear they see a pale shape drifting behind the altar slit. Her departure becomes legend, not a death, not a disappearance, but a transformation. The cell remains untouched, a shrine to absence. The slits stay open, as if waiting for her return. The priest, now old and stooped, still sets a loaf of bread in one slit every morning and a cup of water in the other. Though no hand receives them, that he murmurs, she listens and walks. Away, generations pass. The church weathers storms. The walls crack, then are repaired. The roof sags, then is rebuilt. The world outside changes. New kings, new wars, new crops. But the anchor hold remains exactly as it was the day she vanished. Scholars study the cloth. Poets write of her final words. Artists paint her silhouette in soft grays and blues. A few historians dismiss the tale as myth. Many more accept it as truth. The anchoress's name is long forgotten, but her story is never gone. It lives in the silence she left behind, in the empty chamber that holds everything she was and everything she became. Because sometimes absence speaks louder than presence. When the anchoress vanished, her cell became a legend, not merely a relic, but a living symbol woven into the fabric of the village and beyond. Over the centuries, her story echoed in churches and courts, in songs and sermons. Her absence shaped generations. Point 1. The empty cell as pilgrimage site. The day after the opening, the villagers kept away. Fear tangled with reverence. But in the weeks that followed, outsiders began to arrive. Travelers on dusty roads, merchants whose wagons rattled through the nearby crossroads, pilgrims seeking miracles. They came not for relics of bone or cloth, but for the space itself. Airing out the heavy stone chamber, priests set a bench outside the door to welcome visitors. They placed a small box inside, candles, wax, a prayer book. Word spread that the hollow space held a blessing. Sick children were brought to its threshold. Barren women touched its lintels. Lost travelers pressed their hands against its cold surface and wept. In time, customs formed. On Michaelmas, local families left bread and coins in the slit. On the eve of St. Bridget's feast, maidens wove ribbons around the door frame. Each act honored the woman who had chosen silence over speech, solitude over society. The cell transformed, from prison to sanctuary, from sorrow to hope. Point 2. Chroniclers and poets embraced the tale. Monks at a nearby abbey added a chapter to their chronicle. In the year of our Lord 1220, there lived within these walls a woman of great devotion. She spoke, no more to flesh and blood, and yet her voice found its way to all hearts. They included her simple epitaph. Here stood the bride of stone. Her absence taught us more than her presence ever could. Poets, inspired by this image, penned verses. No crown nor sword could bind her, but walls she built around her soul, and in that quiet vault she whispered the prayers that made us whole. These poems were copied into songbooks. Minstrels sang them, by hearth and campfire. Soon, distant lords knew of the stone bride, as she was called. Point 3. The cell's architecture and preservation. Architects and masons studied the anchor hold's design. They measured the thickness of the walls, nearly 2 feet of limestone and mortar. They marveled at the precision of the slits, one facing the altar, another facing the yard. They noted how the stones bore faint scorch marks, evidence of countless candles and oil lamps. In the 14th century, a wealthy patron funded repairs. He reinforced the roof, replaced decaying beams, and installed a wrought iron grill over the altar slit to catch stray offerings. The villagers raised funds with festivals, barley sales, and fairs. The cell glowed again. In the 17th century, antiquarians sketched the anchor hold, mapping each brick and joint. Their drawings preserved the original layout, which later guided restoration after a severe storm cracked the north wall. Through disasters and neglect, the cell endured, maintained by those who saw more than stone. They saw her spirit. Point 4. Legends and miracles attributed to the anchor hold. Stories multiplied. A blind beggar regained sight after spending a night beside the cell. A fisherman's nets filled with fish once he hung a net on the outer wall. A widow's sorrow eased after she slept beneath the shrine, dreaming of the anchoress's gentle voice. Skeptics dismissed these as coincidence, but belief was stronger than doubt. Churches recorded healing accounts alongside saints' lives. Medical texts cautioned that faith could shape recovery, whether by divine grace or the placebo of hope. People left tokens, rusted keys, seashells, shards of pottery. A medieval guild donated a glass lamp to hang above the entrance. Inscriptions traced pilgrims' names and dates, creating a tapestry of devotion carved in stone. Point 5. The anchor hold in art and literature. Artisans depicted her silhouette in stained glass. Children in blue and green robes pressed their faces against the windows. A chapel in Norwich held a panel showing the anchoress cloaked in white, her hands crossed in prayer. In literature, a 19th century poet wrote a novella, The Voice Behind the Wall, imagining her inner thoughts. That a modern novelist placed her cell at the center of a historical mystery, linking her to hidden treasure and secret passages beneath the church. Across centuries, her image shifted: saint, madwoman, feminist icon. Each era reinterpreted her life, finding new meaning in her silence. Point 6. Reflections on absence and presence. Philosophers drew analogies. Absence, wrote one cleric, is a mirror reflecting our desires. The wall, mused a Renaissance thinker, shows that devotion need not be loud to echo forever. Her absence became a presence, a teaching on solitude, faith, and the power of choice. In a world of noise, bells, wars, proclamations, her silence spoke more loudly than any trumpet. Point 7. Modern pilgrimages and renewed interest in our time. Tourists visit the remote church. They take photographs, write in guidebooks, and leave prayers tied to the wrought iron grill. Historians host tours, recounting her life and its mysteries. Scholars debate whether she truly vanished or whether caretakers hid her remains for safety. The cell survived 2 world wars, minor vandalism, and changing religious climates. In the 1960s, a local historical society cataloged every artifact: shards of pottery, candle stubs, scraps of cloth. They published a booklet, Voices in the Wall. Today, the Anchorhold is a protected site. Its original stones are numbered. Each year, on the anniversary of her sealing, villagers ring a single bell at dawn, just once, to honor the woman who chose stone over flesh. Point 8. The symbol endures. Her story reminds us that devotion can take many forms, that silence can be an act of strength, that absence can shape presence in profound ways. The Anchorhold stands as a testament, a wall that held a living soul and now holds our collective memory. It teaches that history is written not only by those crowned, but by those who choose their own path, no matter how still, how stonebound, how silent.